Inga Frickland spent years working in the state attorney's office in Cook County, Illinois, which covered the city of Chicago. She has since then spent time in Afghanistan, in Iraq. She now calls Bend, Oregon home, and again has kind of switched sides on the war on drugs from, as we said, working in the state's attorney's office to now being someone who thinks the war on drugs wasn't necessarily the right way to go. Inga Frickland joins us via Skype from Bend, Oregon. Inga, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here and provide maybe the U.S. perspective on what Canada's going to do now.
Well, I know, and I appreciate that. Well, let me ask you this just first off. What changed your mind? What changed your mind from someone working in the state attorney's office to going, no, you know what, legalization's the way to go?
Well, I guess when I first started out as a young prosecutor in Chicago, and I'd see all these drug cases, all the murder cases, I thought, gee, drugs are bad. These people shouldn't be using it. Let's prosecute them. But then the more I saw of it, I would see people with a long rap sheet of, could be dozens or more of mostly drug convictions. And I knew that this person was never going to get a job in the legitimate economy. All we were doing was cycling them right back into the drug trade. So putting all these public resources toward prosecution, we didn't change what we were doing. They didn't change what they were doing. And we were just making things worse and worse. And then in later years, when I worked for about 5 years in Afghanistan, I saw what we did to that country because we made their main cash crop, opium poppy, illegal. And the result was just massive corruption up through their Department of the Interior, which was their police, and their government. And it looked to me like the only thing which could be done to get a handle on this was legalized so it could be regulated. So in 2012, after I came back from Afghanistan, I joined the organization now called Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which is former police, prosecutors, judges, people background like mine who used to prosecute drugs, who have decided that the war on drugs was a horrible idea. And we are campaigning in the U.S. and internationally to try to stop the war on drugs. And as Dane Larson just said, if you legalize, then you can regulate. Otherwise, you just leave the whole problems up to the local criminals. So that's why I've done a 180.
Now, and you mentioned you live in Bend, Oregon now. You had a front row seat as Oregon became one of the states in the United States to legalize marijuana. What were some of the concerns people were talking about once the vote passed and they knew this day was coming where legalization was coming? What kind of, alarms were people sounding?
Well, some of the same alarms that, before the legalization vote, which I had worked on, and other states have also seen it, especially the police and prosecutors saying, oh my God, there's going to be all these highway accident problems. How many more police are we going to have to hire and train into recognizing drug impairment? Complete scare tactics. And I think that's a totally bogus argument. It sort of suggests that by legalizing marijuana, what this means is bringing in a substance that's never been here before, like importing it from Mars or something. Instead, people have been driving or not, well impaired with marijuana or not, for decades because the stuff's widely available. It's a plant. So there's not going to be anything different about trying to keep the highways safe.
And so after it did pass, exactly. So now that the dispensaries are open, has there been a rise in car accidents? Has there been a rise in fatalities?
No, there hasn't been at all because people were driving beforehand and they're driving now. And I think that maybe over a somewhat longer term, there's actually going to be less problem of people driving while impaired with marijuana because as it becomes regulated and graded as to potency, people are going to know exactly what they're getting. And we're probably never going to get quite as precise as the alcohol by volume that's on every beer bottle label, where people know exactly what it is they're getting. But, I don't know if Canada has this designated driver for alcohol that is popular in the States. You get one person who's going to, not imbibe, and then it's his responsibility to drive. But that's something that we got into because people could understand what it was that the strength of what they were drinking, and know when they were impaired.
You mentioned that you worked on the campaign when it came up to a vote, whether it should be legalized or not. What do you think was the biggest factor in that actually passing?
I think because Oregon had had medical marijuana going back to the 1990s, so it was something which was fairly familiar. And the idea of getting something better regulated to keep it out of the hands of kids was a popular idea. And also our legislation included a provision that counties that voted against it on the 2014 ballot would be able to opt out. And that gave some comfort to people in mostly the eastern half of Oregon, a fairly economically depressed area. And most of them voted against having marijuana.
Did they opt out?
What?
Did they opt out? I'm wondering, once they saw the success
Yes,
and the money that was
opted
generated.
out.
Yeah.
And then many of them are opting back in.
Yeah.
Because they're seeing that the sky did not fall in other areas. And there was an interesting provision in the part of the law having to do with the tax revenues. And that 10% are supposed to go to cities based on the number of licensees, and 10% going to counties based on available canopy grow size and the number of licenses. So there was some incentive here that if counties wanted to reap the benefits of the marijuana tax, they were going to have to participate. And it's turned out the taxes are making serious money. The highest prediction before legalization passed was $16 million a year. Well, in the first year, it turned out to be 60.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
So, money talks.
No, that's what we expect. And that's what we expect will be the same situation here. And I've always been a big believer you have to earmark the taxes for something in particular so people can see the tax dollars being used and be able to visualize it and go, okay, it's legalized, but look at that new school, look at the new healthcare machinery, whatever it may be.
Now, Oregon has 40% earmarked for education, 20% for mental health and drug and alcohol services, only 15% for law enforcement.
No, that's the key. Inga, thanks so much for doing this and appearing on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Well, good luck, and I hope Canada legalizes. That's going to help the rest of our states move along.
Yeah, well, we're moving closer and closer. Thank you so much. That's Inga Frickland, as we said, a former prosecutor in the state attorney's office in Cook County, Illinois, which covers Chicago, spent time in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and now calls Bend, Oregon home, and again was part of the campaign to legalize marijuana there. And she talked about all the scare tactics and the same things we're hearing on this side of the border of what might happen, and then how none of that really transpired. And talk about, they estimated $16 million in tax revenue. It's at $60 million, and that's just in the first year. Amazing. If you need more information, of course, you can check with Inga Frickland online.